I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and at that time, there were no black people on television or in the movies, pretty much at all. And if that's something that, if you weren't around back then, it's hard to really imagine the fact that there was nobody on TV. I remember, when James Brown or Duke Ellington would be on a variety show like Ed Sullivan, all of a sudden the phone would start ringing. And people would be saying, turn on the TV, there's a black person on. I had this crazy memory early on in my life. I was watching a show called The Dick Van Dyke Show. Does anybody remember Dick Van Dyke? Dick Van Dyke Show. And I was a young kid, and I'm watching this show, and there was this episode that I later learned was very, 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 very famous episode of Dick Van Dyke. Because Dick Van Dyke, he has a kid who's like 12 years old or something, his son, and he's thinking that his son is acting weird. And he thinks his son is acting so weird that he's convinced that somehow his baby got mixed up in the hospital when he was born, and he has the wrong kid. And so he finds out 12 years later, the people who had the room next door to his wife, and he invites them over. And the climax of the thing is they ring the bell, and he opens the door, and it's a black couple. Has anybody seen that episode? It's famous. It's a very famous episode. I didn't even know, but as a kid watching that episode, I knew that something was different. And I was young, but I had never seen a black person on a situation comedy. I had never seen a black person, so I was like, well, what's going on here? And then I started, because I didn't even realize that I hadn't seen anybody of color. And it wasn't only black people. Look, it was Asian, Latino, gay. You never saw anybody. That's just how it was. Then in the late '60s, early '70s, there was this thing called blaxploitation films, and those were the best of them were Superfly and Shaft. The worst of them were whatever they were. The Mac and all those blaxploitation films. And all of a sudden, we started to see African Americans in front of the camera. And I happened to be in college at that time, and I said, well, I could make a movie that bad. I could do that. And so, I kind of wandered into a film course just by accident. I just, said, let me take a film class. And what I noticed was that I liked it. And it wasn't like, a light bulb went off, and it was like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. That wasn't what happened. But it's just that I said, well, wait a minute, this is the class? We sit around and watch movies? And then we talk about movies? I can do that. That sounds good. And then when it came time to kind of go out and shoot films and work with other people in the class, I was the guy who, I didn't care, you were going out at 6 in the morning, I would volunteer. Oh, you need someone to help carry the equipment, I would volunteer. Because for whatever reason, I liked it. And that made me say, okay, let me try to switch my major and get into filmmaking. And so that's kind of how I fell into it.